I should have walked away the moment my girlfriend's sister looked at me and said, "You deserve to know what really happened." Instead, I followed her into a coffee shop across the street and watched her wrap both hands around a cup she never drank from. My name's Daniel. I was 23 then, working long shifts at an electronics store and trying to figure out why my life had fallen apart in the space of 2 weeks. Emma, my girlfriend of almost 3 years, had left me without much explanation. One day we were arguing about paint colors for the apartment we planned to rent together, and the next, she was gone. She blocked my number, stopped answering my messages, left a box of my things outside her building. And sitting across from me that rainy afternoon was her older sister, Claire. I'd met Claire dozens of times before, but only in passing. Birthdays, family dinners, awkward holidays where I always felt like an outsider. She was 39, 16 years older than me, and somehow completely different from Emma. Claire listened more than she talked. She wore old sweaters that looked impossibly comfortable and had a habit of staring out windows as if she were searching for something she'd misplaced years ago. Back then, I never thought much about her. That changed the day she called me. "You sounded terrible on the phone," she said quietly, glancing at the rain outside. "I didn't think you should be alone." I let out a laugh that sounded harsher than I intended. "That obvious?" "A little." There was a pause between us, the kind that should have felt awkward, but somehow didn't. I rubbed my hands together, still cold from the walk over. "So, what truth was important enough to drag me across town?" Claire looked down at her cup. For a second, she didn't answer. Then she sighed. "Emma didn't leave because of you." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "She met someone months ago." The words hit harder than I expected, not because I hadn't suspected something, but because hearing it out loud made it real. I stared at the table. "Oh." Claire reached for the sugar packet beside my hand, her fingers brushing mine by accident. It lasted less than a second. Still, neither of us moved away immediately. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The strangest part wasn't the betrayal. It was the look on Claire's face, as if she'd been carrying this secret alone for far too long. After that afternoon, we started talking more than either of us planned. It began with messages, checking whether I'd eaten dinner. Then phone calls that stretched past midnight. She'd tell me stories about her job at the city library, about the books people abandoned halfway through, about the plants she kept forgetting to water. And I'd tell her things I hadn't admitted to anyone. Weeks passed. The pain of losing Emma faded into something quieter, something less sharp. And somehow, without noticing when it happened, Claire became the first person I wanted to talk to every morning. One Saturday, she asked if I could help fix a leaking pipe in her kitchen. "You know I'm terrible at plumbing, right?" I said. "I know," she replied, laughing softly. "But you're better than I am." Her apartment was smaller than I expected. Warm. Books stacked on every shelf. Music playing low from another room. I spent an hour under the sink, pretending to understand what I was doing, while Claire sat on the counter, handing me tools and making fun of my terrible repair skills. For the first time in months, I forgot about Emma entirely. Then the wrench slipped from my hand. Claire caught it at the same moment I reached for it. Our fingers locked together. She looked at me, not like someone's older sister, not like someone trying to comfort an old heartbreak. Something in her expression shifted, subtle but impossible to miss. Then, almost under her breath, she said, "Daniel, there's something I never told you about the night Emma left." And suddenly, the room felt too quiet. Claire's words hung in the kitchen long after she stopped speaking. "Daniel, there's something I never told you about the night Emma left." I was still crouched beneath the sink, the wrench loose in my hand. Water dripped somewhere behind the pipes, steady and irritating, but I barely heard it. I looked up at her. "What do you mean?" For a moment, she didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, twisting the silver ring she always wore on her right hand. The night before Emma moved out, she came to my apartment. Claire forced a small smile that disappeared almost immediately. "She wanted me to tell you for her." "Tell me what?" "That she'd been unhappy for a long time." The words should have hurt more than they did. Maybe because, deep down, I'd already guessed. Maybe because I wasn't really thinking about Emma anymore. And that realization alone felt wrong. Claire was my ex-girlfriend's sister. The sentence repeated itself in my head like a warning sign. She was older than me by 16 years. She'd known Emma her entire life. Even sitting in her kitchen on a rainy Saturday afternoon felt like crossing some invisible line neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Yet I kept noticing things I shouldn't have. The way she tucked strands of dark hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The tiny scar near her wrist. How her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books. None of it meant anything. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Claire climbed down from the counter and opened the cupboard above the stove. "You hungry?" "A little. I made pasta earlier." I laughed softly. "You invited me here to fix your sink, and now you're feeding me?" "You fixed half the sink. That's generous." Her smile lingered longer this time. We ate at her tiny kitchen table while the evening light faded outside. The conversation drifted away from Emma and toward everything else. My job, the classes I'd dropped out of last year, the fact that I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Claire listened carefully, resting her chin against her hand. "You always talk like you're running out of time," she said. I shrugged. "Maybe I am. You're 23. Easy for you to say." The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. She looked down at her plate, smiling, but there was something sad behind it. "You think getting older makes things easier?" I didn't say that. And for the first time that evening, neither of us pretended not to understand why my heart suddenly started racing. I should have gone home the second Claire asked me to stay. Instead, I sat back down at her kitchen table while she rinsed the plates, pretending that the knot in my chest was just leftover anger from Emma, just exhaustion, just anything except what it actually was. The apartment had grown darker. The rain outside had turned into a steady storm, drops sliding down the windows in crooked lines. Claire switched on the lamp beside the couch, and the warm yellow light softened everything. The bookshelves, the old photographs on the wall, the oversized sweater she kept tugging at when she was nervous. "You don't have to entertain me, you know," I said. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter. "Maybe I'm not." I laughed quietly, but the answer stayed with me longer than it should have. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Claire picked up a novel from the coffee table, turning it over in her hands without opening it. "You ever wonder how people end up alone?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Where did that come from?" She shrugged, staring at the cover. "I don't know. Maybe because I thought I'd have a different life by now." I wanted to say something reassuring, something smart, but all I could think about was the look on her face. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something quieter than that. The expression of someone who had spent years convincing herself she was fine. "You're not alone," I said before I could stop myself. Claire looked up. The room felt impossibly still. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Something honest. Something dangerous. But her phone rang from the kitchen. She blinked, almost startled, and walked away to answer it. I tried not to listen. I really did. "Emma," Claire said softly. The sound of her name hit me like cold water. I stood and wandered toward the window, telling myself this whole thing had gotten out of hand. Claire was grieving her own broken past. I was still getting over a relationship. Whatever strange connection had formed between us was temporary. It had to be. Behind me, Claire kept her voice low. "No, he's still here." A pause. Then, "I know." I stared at the rain outside and suddenly felt ridiculous for staying. When Claire returned, she set her phone down carefully. "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Emma wanted to know if you'd picked up the last of your things." Oh. Neither of us mentioned the awkwardness hanging in the air. "I should probably leave," I said, reaching for my jacket. Claire opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the apartment. We both froze. "It's probably my neighbor," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. She walked to the door and opened it halfway. From where I stood, I couldn't see who it was, only hear the voice of a man asking if everything was all right because of the leak earlier. Claire assured him it was handled and closed the door again. But something had changed. Maybe it was the reminder that there were other people in our lives, other histories, other boundaries. I slipped my arms into my jacket. "You really should call a real plumber," I said, trying to sound casual. Claire smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe." I moved toward the door, determined to leave before I said something stupid. But as I reached for the handle, Claire stepped beside me and gently brushed a drop of water from my sleeve. Her hand lingered for only a second. Then she looked up at me, closer than either of us expected, and quietly asked, "Daniel, if things had been different, do you think we still would have met like this?" And standing there, with the storm outside, and her hand still inches from mine, I realized I didn't know which answer scared me more. Claire's question stayed between us long after she asked it. If things had been different, do you think we still would have met like this? I should have answered right away. I should have laughed it off, said something safe, something that would let both of us step back from whatever we were doing. Instead, I stood there with my hand still on the door handle, looking at her. "I don't know," I admitted. It was the truth, but not all of it. Because the truth was that I'd started noticing Claire weeks ago. Not in some sudden, dramatic way. It had happened slowly, in the late-night calls that lasted longer than either of us intended, in the quiet moments when she listened to me talk about my life as though it mattered. And that terrified me. She was Emma's sister. Every time I forgot that, something would remind me. A photograph on the shelf, a story from childhood. The fact that, if things had gone differently, Claire might have been standing beside Emma at our wedding one day. The thought made my chest tighten. Claire took a step back and folded her arms. "You don't have to answer." "You asked." Maybe I shouldn't have. The room had become unbearably quiet. Rain tapped against the windows, softer now, but steady enough to fill the silence between us. I let go of the door handle. "Why did you ask me that?" She looked away immediately, toward the lamp in the corner of the room. "I don't know." "That's not true." Claire laughed under her breath, though there was no humor in it. "You really want me to answer that?" I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded anyway. She walked past me and sat down on the couch, rubbing her hands together. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked nervous. "You know what the worst part of all this is?" she asked quietly. I stayed standing. "What?" She hesitated. "The worst part is that I liked you before any of this happened." I stared at her. The sentence didn't make sense at first. My brain rejected it outright. "What?" Claire shook her head, already regretting saying it. "Not like that," she said too quickly. "At least, I tried very hard not to." The words hit me harder than Emma's betrayal ever had. "How long?" She smiled sadly. "Long enough to know I should have stayed away." I sat down across from her, trying to understand what she meant. "All those family dinners," I began. "I know." "And when Emma and I fought?" Claire nodded once. I hated myself for caring, she whispered. You have no idea how much. Neither of us moved. I could hear the clock in the kitchen, the rain outside, the sound of my own breathing. Part of me wanted to stand up and leave before this became something neither of us could take back. But another part, the part I'd been trying to ignore for weeks, wanted to stay exactly where I was. Claire, I started. She looked up, her eyes fixed on mine. You don't have to say anything. But what if I want to? The question escaped before I could stop it. For a moment, something changed in her expression. Hope, maybe. Fear. Both at once. She opened her mouth as if she were about to answer, then stopped. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there, the distance between us suddenly feeling impossibly small, waiting for one of us to decide what happened next. Neither of us moved for what felt like forever. Claire sat across from me, her confession still hanging in the air, and I kept replaying her words in my head. I liked you before any of this happened. I should have been angry, confused, maybe even offended. Instead, I was trying to remember every conversation we'd ever had, searching for signs I'd missed. Claire stood first. This was a mistake, she said quietly, grabbing our empty cups from the table. You shouldn't have heard any of that. I followed her into the kitchen. Claire, no. She forced a smile that looked painful. You just got out of a relationship with my sister. I'm almost 40. None of this makes any sense. You think I haven't thought about that? She stopped at the sink, but didn't turn around. For weeks, I'd convinced myself that whatever existed between us was temporary, a strange attachment born out of heartbreak and loneliness. But standing there, watching her shoulders tense as if she were bracing for something, I realized I didn't want to walk away, and that realization scared me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Emma. Claire noticed the screen light up before I could hide it. Neither of us spoke. You should answer, she said. I don't want to. Daniel. I stared at the phone for a few seconds before finally picking up. Hello? Emma didn't waste time. Are you with Claire? The question caught me so off guard that I looked up immediately. How do you know I'm here? She told Mom you were helping with the leak. I leaned against the counter. Why does it matter? There was silence on the other end. Then Emma sighed. Because I think you should know something. Something in her voice felt different. Not angry, not jealous, just tired. What? She knew I was leaving you. I frowned. What are you talking about? I told her months ago that things between us were over. Emma paused. And before you start imagining things, Claire tried to stop me. My eyes drifted toward Claire, who was standing completely still a few feet away. She told me I was making a mistake, Emma continued. She spent weeks convincing me to talk to you instead of disappearing. I looked at Claire again. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because she won't. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Emma said something I never expected. You know, growing up, Claire was always the one who gave things up for me. Emma, she thinks she doesn't deserve good things. She always has. I heard Claire whisper my name from across the kitchen, shaking her head, as if she already knew what her sister was saying. She's probably furious that I'm telling you this, Emma said softly. But for once, I don't want her to lose something because of me. The call ended before I could respond. For several seconds, neither Claire nor I spoke. Finally, she let out a breath and crossed her arms. You weren't supposed to hear that. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. How long? Claire laughed bitterly. Does it matter? Yes. She looked at me for the first time since the call. Long enough that I learned how to ignore it. The room suddenly felt smaller. All this time, I'd thought we were standing on opposite sides of some impossible line. But now I wasn't sure there had ever been a line at all. Claire glanced toward the front door, as if giving me one last chance to leave. Instead, I took a step closer, and in a voice that barely sounded like my own, I asked the question that changed everything. Tell me the truth, Claire. Did you stay away from me because you didn't want me? Or because you were afraid I'd want you back? Claire stared at me as if I'd asked her something impossible. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, but everything else had gone quiet. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the apartment, the old radiator clicked and groaned. She looked away first. You really don't understand, do you? I took another step toward her. Then explain it to me. Claire laughed under her breath, though there was nothing funny about any of this. You were dating my sister. I know. You're 23. I know that, too. And I spent months trying not to feel anything because every version of this story ends badly. Her voice cracked on the last word. For the first time all evening, she stopped trying to sound calm. I watched you two build a life together, she said quietly. I listened to Emma complain after your arguments, and every time, I hated myself for wondering if you were okay. Do you have any idea what that feels like? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Claire shook her head. No, of course you don't. She walked past me into the living room, wrapping her arms around herself. I followed, keeping a few feet between us. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to ruin your relationship, she continued. And after she left, I thought it would disappear. I thought enough time would pass and things would go back to normal. Did they? She smiled sadly. You know they didn't. The truth was, I did know, because somewhere between the late-night phone calls and afternoons in her apartment, between conversations that lasted too long and silences that somehow said even more, something had changed in me too. I sat down on the edge of the couch. When Emma left, I thought I was grieving her, I admitted. Claire stayed standing, her eyes fixed on the floor. But lately, I paused, searching for the right words. Lately, I've been wondering whether I was really grieving the future I thought I'd have. She finally looked at me. And what future is that? I let out a slow breath. One where I didn't have to ask myself why I keep finding excuses to see you. The room fell silent again. Claire blinked, and for a second, all the certainty she carried around disappeared. You shouldn't say things like that. Why? Because I want to believe you. I stood and crossed the distance between us, not enough to touch her, just enough that neither of us had to raise our voices. This isn't about Emma anymore. Daniel! No, listen! My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. I'm not saying any of this is simple. It isn't. People are going to judge us. Maybe we'll even judge ourselves for a while. Claire lowered her eyes. But I'm tired of pretending that what's happening between us isn't real. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she laughed softly, wiping at the corner of her eye. You always were terrible at walking away. Funny, I said. I was about to say the same thing about you. That made her smile, an actual smile this time. Small, but genuine. She reached for my hand slowly, as though giving me every chance to change my mind. I didn't pull away. Her fingers tightened around mine. We can't know where this ends, she whispered. I nodded. I know. Claire looked up at me, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. Then promise me one thing. What? And standing there in the quiet apartment, her hand wrapped around mine, I realized that whatever she asked next would change both of our lives forever. Claire kept holding my hand while we stood in the middle of her living room, both of us waiting for the other to say something that would make all of this easier. Then promise me one thing. What? She took a breath and looked down before answering. Promise me that if we do this, If we stop pretending, you won't disappear the moment things become difficult. For a second, neither of us moved. I understood why she was asking. Emma had left without a real goodbye. Claire's fiancé had walked away years earlier. Somewhere along the way, both of us had learned to expect people to leave. I can't promise that life will be simple, I said quietly. But I can promise that I won't run. She smiled at that, though her eyes were still shining. That night, I left her apartment without kissing her, without making some dramatic declaration. We both knew our story deserved more honesty than that. It wasn't about one perfect moment. It was about choosing each other after weeks of confusion, guilt, and silence. The days that followed weren't easy. I met Emma one last time to return the last box of her things. We sat on a park bench, awkwardly avoiding each other's eyes. "You really care about her, don't you?" she asked. I thought about lying. Instead, I nodded. Emma looked out at the lake and let out a small laugh. You know, for a long time, Claire thought she was supposed to live her life for everyone else. She glanced at me. Don't let her do that anymore. It wasn't the conversation I had expected, but somehow, it gave both of us the closure we needed. Claire and I took things slowly after that. There were uncomfortable conversations with friends. There were moments when the age difference felt impossible to ignore, and moments when we questioned whether we were making a mistake. Sometimes she worried that people would judge us. Sometimes I worried that she was still holding back, but little by little, the doubts became quieter. Months later, I was back in her apartment, pretending to fix the same kitchen sink that had never actually been broken that badly in the first place. "You're terrible at repairs," Claire said from the counter, smiling. "And yet, you keep calling me. Maybe I like the company." I looked up at her, and this time, neither of us looked away. What surprised me most wasn't that I had fallen in love again. It was who I had fallen in love with. When Emma left, I thought I had lost the person I was meant to be with. I thought heartbreak was the end of the story. It wasn't. Sometimes life falls apart because it's making room for something you never expected. Sometimes the right person arrives at the wrong time. And sometimes love isn't loud or immediate. It grows quietly, in late-night conversations, in shared coffee, in the way someone asks you to stay a little longer. Claire taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who sees all the messy parts of you and stays anyway. A year after that rainy afternoon, we moved into a small apartment together, and for the first time in a long time, neither of us was waiting for the other person to leave. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?